Ah, there we go. So, Ju, I think we can you hear us?
I can.
Uh, I think we can hear you, but hold on a second.
Okay.
I'm a little bit afraid because I've got you on the big screen, so that people can see you.
It feels a little intimidating to me because I can't see anyone there.
You are looming over us, Ju.
Yeah. There are not many people here. Let me adjust the audio here if I can. Can you adjust your audio up, perhaps?
I'm doing that as we speak.
Awesome. So what I was going to suggest was that we start with Ju is the brains behind the operation. Ju and my colleague Neary, who unfortunately is probably in bed at this point, have been working on drafting ODL user-stories, so high-level use cases for OpenDaylight, and breaking those down for a number of reasons. But I was going to get Ju, can you perhaps go over what's been done so far, why, and what we want to get out of today's session?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And let's see. I don't know. Should I share, or do you have your screen sharing? What's best?
You should share.
Okay. Let's see.
Or I can put, if you tell me what you want me to put up here, I'm happy to put the user stories main. I've got a number of things. I've got the Google spreadsheet up in my browser here. The OpenStack personas.
I would probably share the. Let me put the link in Blue Jeans because I'm wondering about sharing up from my side may not be as good. And then the one that you posted onto the wiki. So if we start the conversation by sharing those, and then we can get started. I am in Boston. Okay, super. So, as Dave kindly mentioned, I've been working with some of our Red Hat team members on OpenDaylight, and very recently, so I don't claim to be an expert. But I've been working with some of our team and members, including Neary, sorry if I killed his name, who's been very kind enough to actually help put together a whole list of user stories. So one of the requests has been, from an OpenDaylight perspective, let's try to drive the releases of OpenDaylight going forward to be more targeted towards what customers would like and be more end-to-end, if you will. And one of the things that has been a bit of a challenge is that when I started looking at what had been done on the OpenDaylight side, it was very weak, shall we say. And so we've been trying to improve that. And to that end, I was asked to try to put a little bit of structure or suggest something. So having said that, what I'm about to share with you and talk about is just a proposal on how we can approach it, and it may be a good place to start. And what we're hoping for is for the community to start to collaborate on this and start to flesh it out further. And hopefully, if this is the right venue, maybe it isn't, maybe we'll start to figure out where it should land going forward. That being said, and I'm not sure which screen Dave is sharing, but there is a wiki page called the User-Stories, and I know there's some confusion in the community right now about user stories. I called it user stories from an agile perspective, and I'm hoping from this audience that folks are familiar with what agile is. And in case you're not, it's just a methodology or approach to doing development. And in terms of using the user stories, it's trying to shift the focus from writing about requirements from, say, a feature perspective to talking about them from the perspective of the person who's looking to achieve something. What kinds of goals are they interested in? What are they trying to accomplish? And try to put it from, like I said, the customer's perspective. So when we started, what we did was took a look to see from an OpenDaylight perspective what kinds of capabilities would we like to have within OpenDaylight. And my colleague Near was very kind enough to actually help with building out a larger backlog of what we'd like to see accomplished if we were trying to target, for example, using OpenDaylight SDN controller in conjunction with the OpenStack Neutron ML2 plugin, and have it work as the SDN controller with OpenStack, and what would that entail? And if we were trying to meet what, from a Red Hat perspective, what we've heard from customers as to what they were trying to accomplish, what is it that we need to think about? So there's a larger document that Dave has posted, and that's the PDF file, and I apologize if I'm seeing it. Okay, sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen. The spreadsheet that he's sharing, which has been posted onto the wiki as well, is the longer, if you will, laundry list of use cases at a high level, along with the user stories, some acceptance criteria, some functional and non-functional requirements related to it. So we've got a very long laundry list of, or backlog, if you will. And what we've done is we've also then taken the exercise of prioritizing a lot of these user stories, and I think it's on a different spreadsheet. If you go to the user stories :enterprise SDN controller, the third one. Yeah, so this is a longer list of the user stories that we have in the system, and what we've done is we've instead of trying to post every single user story that we have, and we have, by the way, posted it to the wiki. Again, this is a proposal. What we've taken is taken a subset of those user stories that we thought would be a higher priority, and we've published them into the wiki in the other screen that we were showing just now. So maybe we could jump to that screen. Sorry about that. And sorry for jumping around. So just to give folks a little bit of background to help be on the same page as far as the users that we're targeting or we're focusing on. If you look in this section that's called user roles, these are, because there are no personas to represent who our customers are within the OpenDaylight community yet, and we have a similar effort on the OpenStack side that we're using. That's what Dave was actually pointing to. There's an OpenStack personas ecosystem effort that is currently underway to start to expand on the different types of user roles within the OpenStack cloud. And similarly, what we've done is we've taken a look at that, leveraged some of that effort, and try to distill it down to what are some of the key roles that we see with regards to OpenDaylight, and those are sort of the user roles that you see here, along with what are the main tasks that these particular users are interested in. And as we start looking at some of the user stories, we're typically referencing one or two or three of these user roles that you see listed right here. So if you scroll down a little bit more where you start to see the user stories, and forgive me if I'm jumping a little bit around, just to give you a little background, as I mentioned earlier, these user stories are written from an agile approach. And so if you're familiar or not with a user story template or format, typically it's written as whoever user it is. I want to achieve some kind of task or goal for a particular reason. And at the same time, we've also included an acceptance criteria. And part of this is we want to drive sort of towards, let's all agree on what we're working towards for the customer. But more importantly, after we've done some level of discussion and agree on what we're trying to work towards, there would be some way to actually validate that we're indeed confirming and completing that particular user story as per customer need. And so that's sort of at a high level about the user stories. And just to go with one particular example, in the first one around the IPv4 security groups, these are referring to the OpenStack security group. And so with the very first user story where it says, as a tenant user, I want to be able to control what traffic can flow in and out of my instance or VM using standard TCP/IP characteristics so that I can limit the applications running on it. Now, let's say with this particular user story, while it seems fairly high level, the intent is that for different community members that are thinking about working in this particular space, we would like these user stories to start to drive conversation so that more of the details can then get flushed out. And then finally, if we look at the acceptance criteria, refer to that and say, is this design or this particular implementation that we're thinking on of going to meet this particular acceptance criteria? And so in this particular wiki that you see, we've actually proposed some set of user stories that we would like to see in the Beryllium release. And then in the status and comments column, it lists where it's what stage it is in right now. And I know with regards to the IPv4 security groups, some of the work had actually started, but not all of it was completed. And so that's why it says some of it is going to be addressed in the Lithium SR1 release. And then again, if it's still in the proposal stage, I'll say proposed. So that's at a very high level. I went very quickly through just one very small example. I did invite everybody to come take a look at this. This is a straw man. We would like the community to collaborate on this together, evangelize, flesh it out in further details. If this is not the right venue for publishing or sharing this information, are there better ways of approaching it? And I guess one thing I should mention is I had looked at other different methods of doing it, and it just seemed like the wiki is the most used piece of OpenDaylight community mindshare, if you will, or a more common one. And I know in the OpenStack community, they call them blueprints, and I'm not saying we should do it that way or this particular way, but again, if other folks have other ideas on how we should approach this, we'd love to collaborate and figure out what that way is.
Yep. Thank you, Ju. I had a microphone here so that people can hear me here. So there are a few questions, I guess, that arise from this. Is who in the ODL community would consume these and to do what? It seems like the three primary audiences are identifying things that users want to do and then ensuring we have documentation for them, identifying things that users want to do that aren't possible so that we can drive feature prioritization in the roadmap, and thirdly, test plans, feeding into test plans so that we can verify when we're testing that OpenDaylight does what people actually need. Does that sound right?
Yes, I would say so. And also, primarily, I think this would also address developers who are working on OpenDaylight as well as product management and as to sort of helping with prioritizing or even coming up with what are some of these user stories that we would like to plan in the particular release and everything that Dave said.
So I'm going to open it up for comments, questions in the room. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear them, so we'll ask you. If there is there anybody who has any questions about the utility of this? What kind of help we want? I mean,
when we say tenant user, do we refer to the operator user or a user?
So that's a great question. The question of when we refer to the tenant user, are we referring to the operator user or the actual end user? In our particular use cases or user stories that we have listed, if you look at the user role section further above, the tenant user that we're referring to are actually the cloud consumers, meaning they would typically, their main tasks include provisioning a VM or an instance in the cloud. And so, for example, if they were going to launch an instance, if you will, they would actually assume and hope that a lot of the underlying network services would be taken care of them without having to know about how they'd have to set up the routing or setting up security group or rules around ports and so on. And so the user, for lack of better words, is anybody who consumes any cloud services.
Does it mean that self-service end user can be a technical user and hence we call them tenant user? And because there is a boundary line, if I am an end user, I would rather deal with the application service that runs over ODL, which I want to use, rather than worry about specifically technical aspects of provisioning, I thought. But maybe I may be wrong, because it's a very difficult gray area, I would say.
I'd say a
I'm
tenant
afraid
user is just somebody launching workloads, right? So a consumer of the Nova APIs, for want of a better phrase, and OpenDaylight would be transparent, at least in my mind. But the things that the tenant wants to do may imply features that need to be available in OpenDaylight, unless you're doing it with, neutron agents or things like that, which the goal is presumably that OpenDaylight would remove the need for any neutron agents as soon as possible. But that's getting down into the details.
Tenancy is becoming a problem. Everywhere tenancy we use, and OpenStack they use.
Yeah, we're going to keep with the mic because he's recording.
So I guess I think maybe this is just an observation, but and this is Colin Dixon. I'm the technical steering committee chair for OpenDaylight. But I think that getting into the nitty-gritty details of whether these user stories are appropriate or not is missing the point. I mean, I don't mean. I mean, obviously, we need to get the stories right. But I think the broader question that I really like to see, and that I think what that floored me about this and made me so mind-bogglingly happy it hurts, is that I think if we accept the idea that we can come up with user stories and we can understand that they matter and get developers to run with them, that would be such a huge paradigm shift in OpenDaylight, and it's absolutely something we need to do, and it's something that that the questions I have are, how do we drive this down from a toy example that I think some people really care about into real developers picking this up and running with it? And I don't know, and I haven't seen open source projects do that successfully very often. So I'm curious if people have advice about that and how to sort of help, because I've watched development organizations do it. I haven't watched open source projects do it as well.
So that leads very nicely into why are we here, and what are we asking? So Ju, perhaps you can go into some of the ways we're looking for people to help fleshing these out, and how we can actually ensure that these are used going forward.
So it's an excellent question. It's something I've also pondered as well, and I admit it's also very challenging in the open source community.
I think I can add.
So one of the things that we're trying to do is to reach out to the community. We've spoken with the Open Daylight Technical Marketing Committee. I believe that's Art Fuel, to see if he can help with evangelizing it. We've also reached out to Colin Dixon and Kevin, and I apologize, I don't know his last name, to try to get onto the technical works agenda. But really, these are just some of the examples of things that we're starting to do. The intent is we would like to get more and more of the community involved with it, to be fairly similar to the working group within OpenStack. The enterprise working group in OpenStack is still evolving, but the notion behind that is they've got the operator or the customer base trying to drive the community to working towards making OpenStack more consumable by enterprises or customers, if you will. We'd like to do something similar on the Open Daylight side. I don't know that we quite have as large a community membership just yet, but the intent with this is a straw man for trying to drive that conversation first. I'm not sure if this is the best place to publish it, but we've got to start somewhere. And my hopes is with every member who's actually attending the session or watches it later, take a look at this, see how you can help, and also talk to the developers within your organization, have them look at it. So we've already had the developers working on Open Daylight at Red Hat look at it and try to understand this and ask questions about it and try to work into the future upcoming releases. And so it's really to try to get everyone involved. And Dave, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to add that, so the impetus for this is obviously Red Hat and the things that we are prioritizing for Open Daylight. So that's primarily Open Daylight as network virtualization for OpenStack. But we are, I just want to underline that we are open to adding other very high level use cases and then breaking those down in the same way, right? And certainly NFV use cases in terms of service chaining, network policy, enforcement and definition, and communicating that through the thing, the infrastructure, and other high level use cases. I mean, just so I don't know what the high level what other people are selling Open Daylight to do, basically, or promoting Open Daylight to do, or what other people would like to see Open Daylight enable in users. But if we can get other high-level use cases and break those down in the same way, what it does is it enables us to have a prioritization discussion. It enables us to have a means to do conflict resolution. If there are two things that are conflicting, you go back to, well, what does the user expect, and do we agree on what the user expects? And if we agree on what the user expects, those conversations become easier. So that's what I would like to see is more feedback into the higher level use cases, and your help in seeing, like, first, I don't know if we have complete situational awareness on the things that are in the user stories that are not yet possible in Open Daylight or are not yet documented in Open Daylight. So if we can already just get good awareness of what is possible and documented is probably easier. And then from there, start filling the gaps. I think that's what I'm hoping we can achieve.
Maybe I can add something. See, going deeper would be one way, going wider would be another way. If we go deeper into one specific case, if we can have a flow diagram that actually translates easily to a technical user to possibly code it and test it. And if we go wider, then we have to come up with more user stories and then probably narrow down to what's the priority. Of course, provision is the biggest, earliest priority for anybody before in doing anything. So I think provisioning should be the first one of all the priorities.
Does anybody else have any questions? Is anybody besides Prakash volunteering to help with these? Sure. Okay. So, Ju, what else do you think? Let me stop sharing the screen or get you back up here so that we can see you.
Well, I think probably what I would ask the audience here is, what would you all be interested in seeing as next steps? How do you think we can move this forward?
So I can sort of wander off into the. There we go. You can see me. Hi, I'm Colin Dixon. It's nice to see you in person. And it's Keith, not Kevin, which would. I don't know if that would actually help him schedule you on the AWS call, but it's probably a good first step.
I apologize.
No, it's all good. It's Keith Burns that runs it. But so here's my sort of next step. I have two questions. One of them is, I think getting on the technical workstream call is probably the best thing to do. The second thing is trying to get this to fold this into the release plans of projects. And so projects are doing their Beryllium release plans right now, for the most part, like right now, over the next week. And so if we could get Monday's TWS call to even include some of this, I think that would be really good. And maybe Phil or I can take an action item to make that happen. Yes. So Phil's question was, are you on vacation next week? And I said, yes. And Phil said, I am too. So that's going to make things painful. But let's burn that bridge when we get to it. But I guess my question is, and this is going to show, I get lauded as an open source expert, and that's about the least true thing I can imagine. I've been doing it for about as long as OpenDaylight exists, and there's a lot more people, a lot more experience, and I've learned how to defer to them, and my guess is you are one, and Dave is certainly one, and Chris Wright is another who I sort of lean on hard. How have projects successfully done this? Because I have seen us get together internally inside of OpenDaylight and agree, like, OpenStack is our priority, and just not do as good a job delivering on that as you would imagine, to put it politely. And I'm sort of curious, like, in a development organization, you have somebody that can yell at you in order to say, like, here's the user stories you need to be working on, you can decide priorities. And that's sort of true in open source because almost everybody's employed. We don't have very many hobbyists in OpenDaylight. So, there is money that can be pushed in order to get the right things to happen, but it still seems hard because it's across multiple organizations. And what's been successful here? And I'm really curious.
So,
I think sorry.
Go ahead, Ju. You've been involved in user experience for a lot longer than I have.
It's very hard, as you stated, in open source. Much harder than closed source, and I don't claim to be an expert. I think one of the most critical things to actually making it possible is having a vibrant community and somebody, or not just one person, but multiple people within the community driving it. And I don't know, and I apologize that I'm not as familiar on the OpenDaylight side, but is there a concept of a PTL like an OpenStack within each of different substrates, if you will? If we have PTLs in each of that, if we can start to approach them and have them look at it and try to identify folks who might be willing to sign up to work on it, to have the deeper dive discussions, to go deeper, as I think, Prakash, if I got your name correctly, I hope, that would be ideal. And so it's not a one-person thing. This is about a whole group of like-minded people who want to actually drive that experience forward. And if we are all working towards that goal, probably having some meetings on a regular basis will help move that forward, with also milestones. And also, you want to get people to agree on that we're all working towards this same goal. If we're not, I think, as you mentioned, there are a lot of challenges in open source, and you end up with maybe a product that, or release that's not meeting the needs, and then you try to fix it in the next one, and it might take a little bit longer. I know eventually we'll get there. This is our attempt to try to get there sooner.
So I would just say, yeah, as you said, it's difficult. Either projects have done it centrally, so kind of doing a central command and control type structure. Mozilla, I would say, did their usability and design in that way. Or it's delegated to the people who are productizing, right? So it's by proxy, and I think OpenStack has done a better job of exposing product managers and product designers and getting designers involved in persona than other projects. So maybe that's the model we want to follow. The product working group there and the persona ecosystem. I don't know, but yes, in general, it's never done well. Not to my knowledge.
We need an outreach towards the developers, because within the OpenStack community, when they have the every 6 months a design summit, that's intended to do it. And from my observations, it's really to get people to see face to face each other, begin the conversation, but the work doesn't actually here, it's after. And I think you need more of the developers on the OpenDaylight side meeting, having that face to face and agreeing on some of what we're trying to do, and then brokering some of the conversations then so that folks can go and start to work on different things.
Yeah, and communities where users have a strong voice in the developer community, in general, do better, right?
I mean,
because you've got
that was going to be my hope. So right now we do the same thing. This is our developer design forum, and it's basically getting to see each other face to face, but almost no work happens. The other thing which is frustrating is that, and it's too bad that Margaret left. Margaret was in the back of the room when I wandered in, but we don't have enough. I mean, when developers can experience their users and actually and their users can hit them with things, progress happens faster. And right now our users are ourselves, and that's really bad. I mean, and I think the result is that we build complexity on top of complexity in places. We build big fancy things that look fun but don't really meet people's needs. But we don't have any feedback loop in order to close that off. And it ends up being and few of us that actually do try and push against that end up in he said she said arguments with people which you can't resolve. And so if we have I guess hopefully. I mean, if we have some of our major users look through, maybe that's the right model, which is to say, try and feed the user studies back into the user stories into the user advisory group, have the user advisory group rank them, and that comes out. Because if I can stand up and say, AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon say jump, the answer is going to be different than if I say, I think that you're wrong. And so maybe that will help, but it sounds like we're doing the right things. So anyway, and I think this is. This is the coolest thing. I think this is the coolest and most different thing I've seen happen in OpenDaylight in the last probably year. And so if we can couple this to actual users saying things, and we can get it on the TBS, we do have PTLs for reference. We can get into PTL's hands, especially PTLs running projects that are really user focused. I think that will help a lot.
So I was going to put Phil on the spot here, because so we also have Phil Rob from the Linux Foundation over here. No, not over there. So Phil, I was going to ask how we can bring this to the user advisory board, also the board. I think the board or kind of the higher level, maybe get some more vendors, user experience teams engaged in helping and collaborating on this. I know that we've engaged a couple, right? We've talked to Brocade, somebody from Brocade, Jew, is that correct? I think so.
I've reached out to a bunch of folks, but I never heard back.
And Uri from Intel is involved in the conversation. Well,
yeah.
So we're trying to ensure that we're kind of getting other vendors who are productizing OpenDaylight involved. Is this something that we could get your assistance in driving up to the membership and the user advisory board?
Well, since I'm on the spot, I suppose I should take the mic from you now. No, I think what Colin said, which is why I said no to the mic the first time, is the right approach. Certainly for getting these in front of the user advisory group. We are blessed thus far with a user advisory group that actually is doing work, right? They are going back into their organizations, understanding what has been done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and they've been quite willing and open to share that with us. And again, and that takes effort, right? And so that's always the first. And coming to a meeting once a month is one thing, but actually doing stuff in between the meetings is entirely different. And thus far, they've showed quite strong willingness to put in the effort. So no, providing them with this material and asking them to rank that and have a discussion over 1 or 2 different meetings that we have is very, I expect that it would be done, and it would be done well. I also think there might be a chance for OpenDaylight to actually even implement this better than OpenStack, only for the sense that the players involved in OpenDaylight have the same desire and level of commitment as those large vendors that are behind OpenStack, but there are fewer of us, so there is less diversion that I would expect out of the activity. So I would find that quite promising. And yes, I'm also happy to take this to the board, and that will happen as an artifact of just being part of the advisory group, which is where I would start.
The goal of, I think, the board conversation was more to ensure that we're talking to the product teams in members. I don't know if that was clear. Okay, cool.
So I'm just curious, I mean, how does the input from OPNFV in other organizations like that factor into what you're doing here?
It's a good place to generate user stories. Yeah.
I do represent OPNFE, so my thinking is that with little resource, trying to focus on too many things will dilute the effort. So I would just say we have defined enough use cases as I see. Just pick 2 or 3. Could be 1 related to the operator, 1 related to the user, and 1 related to developer. And give developer saying that I want to take this specific development thread to the end. Go from the use case to the acceptance and come up with something. So if you have 3 of them done even in the next summit, I would be happy, because that at least has, we have done a lot of listing, a lot of cases. But if we can fan through in 3, then we can assign to people very easily, saying, hey, this is the process, just follow, and we get this done in the later summits. So I would say narrow down. Of course, OpenFE, operator side, we can come up with something, 1 at least. Let the developer in the ODL community take, and let the end user take 1 use case and run through the end, so that by next summit we have complete readiness to replicate it and push it out fully. That's my suggestion. And to that effect, the operator side or OpenFE side, I'll try to get 1 through. That's
So
commitment.
Just to go back to Lawrence's question, I think, so there are a number of us involved in OPNFV.
I recognize lots of faces.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how that fits into this process that Ju's doing.
So we do have NFV as something that's a high priority. I think some of the requirements projects are helping drive some of the user case studies, but it's not. I don't think. I don't know. What would you say, Ju? I feel like there's some very high priority near-term things that need to happen for OpenDaylight to be a good network solution for OpenStack, and that's where we've been focusing our effort. But.
Right. So I think as Steve mentioned, our initial focus was more around OpenDaylight. I'm sorry, not OpenDaylight, OpenStack. As far as OPNFV is concerned, it's definitely on our radar. And as mentioned, this is just a straw man and starting point to have discussion. And yes, I definitely agree it needs to be expanded out to cover a whole bunch of other use cases that we haven't even started to put together. And this is not a one-person effort. This is really a call to arms, I guess, or call to action to everyone in the community. Let's try to collaborate on this. And as it gets bigger, we can figure out where is a better place to host this. But at this point, we don't yet have any user stories or use cases listed around OPNFV. But if you, Larry, would like to jump in and do them, we'd love for you to do that
Well, I mean, OPNFV,
or start them.
you know, my understanding, OPNFV is driving blueprints into OpenStack to try to address things out of the telco working group, right? And that's fine. You know, they drive that into OpenStack, and then somehow OpenStack drives it back to ODL. I mean, I know we've got this conversation thing going now. It would seem to be a more direct path to deal directly with the ODL folks on things that need to get done, right? Especially if you're focused on OpenStack, right?
So just to provide a little bit of context, those conversations are happening already. Steve Gordon is a colleague of mine who's leading the telco working group. I'm involved in OpenNFV and OpenDaylight and have been organizing kind of cross-collaboration meetings for the last release cycle. We've also been talking to Frank Starsky, who's open source work item in Etsy, Etsy TST. So we've a lot of the connection points were there. We're trying to grow that discussion, and that's part of what we want to do here is ensure that we've got many more voices being heard.
So OpenStack uses this blueprint process. Do you guys have a similar process?
Who's you guys?
ODL. Yeah, I mean, it's that thing what the guy said the other day. I mean, which foot you standing on, right? I mean, is there a kind of a process like that where you can drive requirements in?
Okay, so the objective answer is okay. So there's two answers. One of them is at a top level, no. We are very much still decentralized, but the broader answer is at the beginning of a release cycle, every project develops their release plan. And so if you understand what project you should engage with, which usually isn't too difficult, and if you have trouble with that, talk to me, and I'll help you point in the right direction. And they actually develop release plans which have milestones and deliverables on them. And if you get what you need on one of those release plans, the chances of things happening goes way up. I would say, so loosely speaking, we don't have anything as nice and as centralized as blueprints, although blueprints are always within our project in OpenStack too. So maybe it's not that different. Maybe I'll change my answer to yes. It's our release plans every 6 months. But it's not quite as formalized. They're not quite as independent. Sort of the project has one release plan that's not really decomposable elements. But that's the right engagement point. And that's happening right now for Beryllium. So the Beryllium release, which is going to come out in early 2016, assuming that I'm able to land it on time like we did with Lithium, but I'm hopeful, is the release plans are being drafted and finalized right now. So almost all the projects have a draft release plan up. If you search for Beryllium release plan on Google, I think it'll take you to our wiki page first, and that'll tell you the projects that are participating. You'll be able to see their draft release plans, and if you can't, they'll be able to see them soon, and you'll be able to and there's a place to actually make requests on that page to say, this is a thing I would like out of you. It's really so far been geared at cross-project collaboration within OpenDaylight, so at code-level technical interactions, but we definitely need to change that. And I think if you showed up and asked either to their mailing lists or to their or on their project proposals, that you would find that they'd be receptive.
So just one thing before we finish, because I think we're out of time. But so far, this has been something that's been happening more or less in kind of a steadily growing circle of personal email addresses, right? Where in the OpenDaylight community would be the right place for this conversation to happen? If we wanted to move this to the community, I mean, is there a mailing list that would be the best one? Is there a design, product, documentation? What would be the right? Well, docs is probably too narrow, but.
No, that I can answer pretty. I don't think there is a one place. We need to evolve one or find a place for it. In the short run, the technical workstream call, which happens on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, is the place where we get the most broad attendance with diversified. I can walk. It turns out I have legs, so I'll get in the camera, and I can try and look at that camera and then this camera and that camera. No, but anyway, so that's where we get the most. Broad involvement from a wider array of people. So that's one place. I think the user advisory group is the other. The user advisory group is the other place where this should happen. And the user advisory group, we need to evolve. Right now, it's sort of it's an appendage that's sort of flapping off in the wind, and we need to change that. There are good reasons why that was true for a while, but I think that really this summit was the coming out party for that, and they will be more attached and more involved. So that's the second place to engage. We do not have a mailing list or a group of like-minded people that is consistently and persistently pursuing this. And one thing to think about would be, does it make sense to spin up an OpenDaylight project, which is a product working group, which would have their own Git repository where you could actually store documents in and your requirements, version them, be able to point to changes, suggest changes, get feedback, have a mailing list, have a wiki page, have a weekly meeting. I'm not saying that's the absolute right thing to do, and you wouldn't have to release anything as part of the release, although you could. But essentially, since that is the unit of allocation in an OpenDaylight, having a project might not be the end of the world.
And it is certainly one of the methods, but it isn't the only method. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure which would be the right way to do it. I mean, all of those factors can certainly be done, but be done instead as the concept as a work group of the nonprofit. So you can either do it embedded inside the community, or you can do it and facilitate it out of a work group of the nonprofit. Either one, I think, works. I'm curious, how does OpenStack do it? Are they a project in OpenStack, or are they something different? The product, as I understand it, that product group it's a working group of the nonprofit. And again, our work groups have mailing lists too, right? And so that would be an easy thing to do. And that's probably the way I would organize it. Is I would set it up as a work group of the nonprofit.
So I think that's a good place. I mean, I have a long to-do list, right? We want to engage with the technical stream to bring this to the developer community. We want to engage with the members in the user advisory group through Phil to bring this to
their attention.
And I would definitely like to see us get some, as I said, situational awareness on the documentation team.
So another question. As a work group of the nonprofit in OpenStack, does that mean that only OpenStack members are?
No, it's open.
Okay.
In fact, deliberately so. But then again, I think everybody who's involved is a member. But
I guess I'm not sure that would be right, because often in the bylaws of such nonprofits, those types of work groups are attended by members of the nonprofit. That would actually be a reason to make it a separate project as part of the open source community. Actually, because it becomes more open, then there is no direct tie that way to the nonprofit.
So
because
the action item then is just figure out a place in OpenDaylight where we can do this.
Yeah, because we want more end users to be helping to create those user stories for us. And right now OpenDaylight members are more vendors than not. Okay. We want more things from the end users than we do from the vendors.
So what you're saying is we need to talk to the
vendors. Yeah, but it's a quick conversation. Yeah, no. It's actually an easy thing. It's an easy thing to figure out then.
Okay.
We'll do it one or the other based on the guarantee that we can make it open to anybody who wants to come and help participate with user stories.
And I think that's a good place to stop. I'd like to, Ju, thank you for taking time during your lunch break, I think, to dial in and present this to us. I think it's great work, and I'm very excited about it. And I'm looking forward to seeing it grow.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I mean when I say, and I think this is probably the most interesting and significant shift in OpenDaylight in the last year. And I mean, this coupled with the user advisory group really getting booted. And so I cannot express how happy and excited I am about where this will hopefully end up.
And I know that the only reason Colin says that is because it gives him more sticks to beat people over the head with to get things done.
So I'd like to thank everybody for their interest in this session, and I will look forward to seeing you all participating in fleshing these out and ensuring they're adopted in the community. Thank you, Ju.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ju.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.